Hello all, and welcome to Explained with Dylan. Boy, are you guys in for a treat today. You guys get an extremely rare Saturday Explained with Dylan video. This week just absolutely flew by, and I only remembered around 9:30 last night that I was supposed to film an Explained with Dylan yesterday. So, here you go, a Saturday Explained with Dylan video. The Ukraine-Russia war has caused quite a bit of change, but there is one massive factor that has not been talked about enough, and it could end up causing a massive worldwide famine. These past couple of years have not been the best for food supply. There have been tons and tons of factors leading up to it, such as droughts across North America and in East Africa, and the fact that the Lebanon-Beirut port explosion destroyed so much grain for Lebanon, and civil wars in countries such as Syria and Yemen are also destroying tons of grain there, and the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan has limited the supply of grain in Afghanistan as well. So grain is not doing well right now. But they just got another huge blow. As of February 2022, Russia has been invading Ukraine. Everyone knows about it by now, and I could say so much about it, but right now I am focusing on the food aspect of it. Ukraine supplies tons and tons of grain worldwide, and so does Russia. Together, the two countries make up 30% of all wheat exported, 20% of corn, and 75% of sunflower oil exported worldwide. Which means that they are vital. Their crops are absolutely vital to so many countries that cannot grow grain themselves, such as mostly Middle East and Northern Africa. Because it's very dry and arid there, and the soil is not very fertile, so it is very, very difficult to grow grain in most of those areas, which means that they rely on importing it from other countries nearby. And the two biggest countries you will find nearby that they can get grain from are Russia and Ukraine. But as I've mentioned, Ukraine's had quite a few of its own issues recently, such as the fact that they are being invaded by Russia. And to make it worse, Russia is invading exactly where Ukraine grows most of its grain, which means that most of those crops are not able to be reached by Ukrainian farmers who have either fled the country or are staying there, but they can't just go out and start farming all their grain. And even if they can farm all their grain, then they have nowhere to put it because, as I mentioned, this war started in February when they still had grain stored over the winter. And they haven't been able to export that grain for almost 9 months now. Which means that it is sitting in grain silos in Ukraine, slowly rotting. And there is no room to put in fresh grain. But it gets worse. Because even if there was storage for Ukraine's grain, that's not the biggest issue. Because they still need to get it somewhere. And there is when we get into the biggest problem that could be causing this worldwide famine. You see, Ukraine ships out virtually all of its grain from the ports in Odessa, which Russia has been trying very hard to take over. But they have not been successful to date. That does not mean, though, that the shipping containers that are going through Odessa are going to be safe, because there are constant naval battles there, which means that they will be under siege as soon as they get close to Odessa by Russian ships. And Ukraine can't do that much to defend it. They're busy fighting the Russian ships already, so they can't protect their own boats. They will just be blown up. Plus, if Russia were to see a bunch of Ukrainian naval ships guarding one container ship, then they would assume they are under major attack. So they would go all under fire on those Ukrainian ships, including the container boats. which causes a major issue for grain shipping. The good news is that Russia and Ukraine have negotiated a deal that Ukraine is able to ship out their grain from Odessa without being under siege by Russian boats. The problem is, the day after that deal was negotiated, then Russia ended up blowing up one of Ukraine's boats. So, we can't entirely trust this deal. It could have been on accident. They could have seen it as a threat. They may have not seen it as a container ship, and they could have done it for that reason, or they may have also just blown it up because they weren't aware of the rules yet. Who knows? But these negotiations aren't going to be perfect. Even if they have decided that they will not blow up any of Ukraine's boats in the government, then Putin is not on the battle lines himself, which means that it's up to the generals, and the generals may not always follow Putin's orders 100%. So, it causes an issue, despite the fact that there have been plenty of negotiations. There have been multiple solutions to this issue, but none of them work entirely. The first one would be that Ukraine could ship out all of its grain by land to neighboring European Union countries, who then in turn could ship them out to the Middle East countries that need it desperately. The issue is that Ukraine has worked on its transportation to Odessa for decades now. And it's all set up that all of the grain will go from trains to Odessa, which then in turn gets put on boats. The issue is that they can't just reroute those trains. Trains obviously need tracks, and they would need to be sent to the major ports of other European Union countries. But currently, they don't have the infrastructure to be able to do that. It'd probably take them about 5 years to set up all of that infrastructure, which is way too long to wait for all those Middle Eastern countries that need the grain now, and desperately. Which brings us to the other potential solution, which is proposed by Lithuania, which would be that countries in the European Union and NATO could offer aid by sending their own naval ships to protect Ukrainian container ships as they go to the Middle Eastern countries. The problem is that this solution has even more flaws to it. You see, Russia would not be whatsoever happy that NATO is sending naval ships into the Black Sea nearby Ukraine, which could lead to the fact that Russia may fire at those boats, which in turn would mean that the European Union and NATO countries would need to fire back, or else the whole mission would be redundant. And if they fired back, that could mean a direct war with Russia from NATO. And we do not want that. The other problem is Turkey. Turkey is technically a NATO member, but in times of war like this, they can be iffy. They don't tend to choose a side in war just based on their personal beliefs. They tend to choose it on which will economically benefit them more. And in this case, they've decided to not take a side at all. They will support NATO so that they don't get kicked out of NATO, but they'll also support Russia in the fact that Russia doesn't go to war with them directly. So they will not help either side in this conflict. And obviously, to get to the Black Sea, you need the Bosphorus. And it states in the Montreux Convention that basically, during a time of war, Turkey can decide who comes in and out of the Bosphorus. And normally, the biggest thing they would do is limit the naval ships that go in and out, so that they control the war near their waters. And that is what they have done, which means that they will not allow any of the European Union countries to go through the Bosphorus to aid Ukraine with their navy. Which means that that plan will never work unless the European Union can get Turkey 100% on their side. But they would never do that because they have strong ally relationships with Russia. Russia gives them quite a bit of oil, which means if they were to split that off, they'd be in a similar energy situation to Germany right now. They would be desperately needing it and no way to get it. So currently, the only thing we can hope is that Russia keeps its treaty with Ukraine and allows all Ukrainian container ships containing grain to leave the Black Sea and deliver it to the Middle Eastern countries that desperately need it. Thank you guys for watching.